Hi, this is Sally Wiener Grotta, and I'm going to be reading a story of mine called The Truth Within, which appears in Across the Universe Alternative Beatles Tales. It's an anthology that came out a couple of months ago. Um, I have to apologize from the beginning that I do not do Liverpool accents. I hope you'll just use your imagination to hear George and John uh, talking to each other. The Truth Within. George stood at the end of the private dock and gazed out across Biscayne Bay. About 4 miles away, the island of Key Biscayne held back the dark, deep ocean. But all he could see of the key was a flat spit of land covered with a haze of greenery. Somewhere along that distant shore was President Richard Nixon's Florida White House. But that wasn't his destination. Nixon had invited George to join him aboard a yacht anchored somewhere between the mainland and the island. A launch would be picking him up soon. Beads of perspiration dripped down his body, dampening George's blousy cotton shirt and loose drawstring Pima trousers. But it wasn't because of the unusual November heat wave. George had experienced far more sweltering temperatures in India. The problem was that he had invested so much hope into this meeting that he was a jumble of sweaty nerves. If he were to have any chance of success, George needed to meditate. He sat on the weathered wood of the dock in a half lotus, softening his spine, opening himself up, taking a slow breath. George tasted the salt air, heavy with the floral fragrances of the garden behind him. Then he closed his eyes and silently chanted his mantra. Chiak, chiak, chiak. As usual, his mind initially refused to stop churning. Embrace your thoughts, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi had taught him. Give them to your mantra so that the distractions that hold you back may be released and become nothing more than dust. Only then will you arrive at the truth within you. Chiak, chiak, chiak. George focused on replacing the dross of the world with the rhythms of the nonsense syllables. Chiak, chiak, chiak. He repeated it over and over again until all that existed was chiak. And then nothing. No thoughts, no mantra, no time, no will. Just being. Anxiety, fear, needs, dreams, all fell away. A sense of peace and of the world's wholeness permeated his every cell. Music filled his mind. As yet unborn songs celebrated his soul's purpose. George was ready. When the White House letter had arrived at Apple Corp, inviting the Beatles to meet with Nixon, George was in the studio with John, Paul, and Ringo. They were working on the orchestration of one of George's songs for the new album. Richard Bloody Nixon? No fucking way, you bastard, John said while balling up the heavy vellum stationery. Then Paul riffed a minor progression and Ringo smashed a rim shot as John tossed it into the rubbish bin. George said nothing initially, but the invitation had eaten at him all afternoon. When John disappeared to take a call from Yoka, Paul and Ringo got tired of waiting for him and left for the day. Alone in the studio, George retrieved the invitation, smoothed it out, and took it to the rooftop to think. Though it was only 4:30 in the afternoon, mid-November's early sunset had turned the neighborhood into a night scene of white lights and dark shadows. And bittersweet memories. The last time he'd been up on the roof had been for their final live concert 11 months ago. Just the Beatles, their music, a chill January wind, their neighbors leaning out windows, and midday pedestrians craning their necks, looking up into the sky. That's where John had found him about an hour later. "Hey, what you doing up here?" George held up the rumpled invitation. "I was thinking about this. It could be an incredible opportunity if we played it right." "What the fuck are you yabbering about?" "I've got to get Nixon hooked on transcendental meditation. Can you imagine a chilled Nixon at peace with himself? No more daring the world to knock that chip off his shoulder. No more manning it up to hide his inner doubts. TM will get him past all that nonsense that blinds him to the truth within him. And poof, no more carpet bombing and napalm and so many dead and wounded. No more war." "You're fucking bonkers." "But I know I can. When I first met you, it was the Pope, then LSD, followed by the Maharishi. Now Nixon? George, you're a bleeding pinball bouncing around the playfield, hoping the next bumper bum's got the key. Haven't you figured it out yet? It's all a load of rubbish." "But John." "No. Meet with Nixon and you'll be handing that evil bastard a Beatles photo op. Hell, Nixon will ride that propaganda wave as far as he can stretch it. He's shite and I'll make you just as filthy as him." But what if? Damn it. I've got to try. The 35-foot wooden speedboat picked George up at 4 p.m. on the dot. The four-man crew was dressed in yachting whites with no insignia, but George had no doubt that they were Secret Service. They said little other than to conform his identity and instruct him to stay seated. George said even less, and spent the short ride watching the various leisure craft crisscrossing the wide expanse of Biscayne Bay, the largest of which was the 165-foot yacht where Nixon awaited him. George had seen the often ridiculed photos of Nixon strolling along a beach in a dark suit, tie, and wingtip shoes. But hey, George had been running for paparazzi for years now. He knew how they could steal private moments and distort them, making you look a fool in the public eye. Yet here they were on a private yacht, far from the madding crowd. And that was exactly what Nixon wore. It seemed that either the man chose to not relax, or that an outfit that others would consider uptight was so integral to who he was that wearing it was relaxing for him. Or was it a power play to set the stage for a meeting with the President of the United States? "Welcome aboard, George. I'm glad you could join us." Richard Nixon's handshake was a firm, solid squeeze, a manly show of friendly strength. Nixon gestured for George to join him at a round mahogany table on the rear deck. A white umbrella was unfurled above them, but only Nixon's chair was within its shade. Refusing to play Nixon's game, George moved his chair out of the baking sun before sitting down. Two bulky, towering white men, also in dark suits and wearing matching sunglasses, stood to either side, distant enough to not intrude, close enough to jump George should he pose a threat to the president. 3 motorboats circled the anchored yacht, maintaining a secure perimeter. A white-jacketed black man approached, placed a tall glass in front of Nixon, and offered another to George. "Kentucky tea, sir?" "Yes, thank you." George put the chill glass down after a single sip when he realized that tea was laced with bourbon. He was no longer interested in mind-altering chemicals. Nixon took several gulps. Then he dabbed his lips with a linen square sporting an embroidered U.S. presidential seal. "I hope your ride wasn't too choppy." "Not choppy at all, Mr. President." "George, no one's here but us two, enjoying the Florida sun and ocean breezes. Please, call me Dick." "Thank you, Dick." George could almost hear John ripping away on the name. "Ducky Dick, Dicky Duck, Fucky Dick." "Fucky Duck." He silenced John's voice in his head. He knew if he had any hope of hooking Nixon on TM, he had to connect with him on whatever level the man lived, keeping everything on an even keel, whatever happened. Dick sat forward in his chair, a studied example of a conversational interest. I understand you're down here alone. That is, none of your gang, your band is here in Florida with you. Where are you staying? Patty, my wife, and me, we're staying with friends in Coral Gables. This morning, we watched the sun come up out of the ocean. It was magic. Florida's a great retreat. Who would have thought that two guys like us from the wrong side of the tracks would need and could have such a magical hideaway? Dick signaled the butler to top up his glass. My daughter Julie is impressed with you. Not that she's one of those hysterical fans, like those foolish girls who faint when Elvis gyrates. Still, I can see why you catch her eye. You're a good-looking fella, or you would be if you got a shave and haircut. And I understand you're a talented musician. But what clinched the deal for me is that I've been told you're a bright young man who's got a finger on the pulse of the younger generation. So I asked my people to arrange this meeting. I thought with all these college disturbances, well, maybe it would help to talk to you. I've been wanting to talk with you too, Dick. I've learned something that I think might help you. Do you know about transcendental meditation? It's an ancient method of clearing your mind, letting go of the stuff that sidetracks you, and centering on what's important. Yeah, I heard about that. It sounds like pagan nonsense to me. Remembering Nixon's family background, George responded, no more pagan than a Quaker meeting house. Now you're going too far, son. Wait, hear me out. George backpedaled quickly. I was brought up Catholic. I was told to just believe what they tell you. But faith has to come from within inside you. That's what TM does. And isn't that what being a Quaker is? Sitting quietly until that peace of God that's within you speaks to you? Nixon's face clouded like a gray shroud. He leaned back into his chair and crossed his arms over his chest. His scowl made his jowls more pronounced. No offense, George, but I don't talk religion with Billy Graham, and I won't talk it with you. Yeah, I get that. I don't like religion either. But TM isn't a religion or mysticism or any of that kind of dope. It's just a path to greater clarity, releasing all the stuff that drags you down so you can reach your full potential and find solutions that might have otherwise evaded you. Photos he'd seen too often of the Vietnam War flashed in George's mind, his subconscious reminding him what was at stake. Like the one in yesterday's paper of a dead Vietnamese child and mother lying in pools of blood, their battered flesh raw and gaping. He tasted bile, and before he could stop himself, he added, I bet it's hard to focus sometimes, Mr. President, when you have to deal with things like the public finding out about the My Lai massacre. Dick's black eyes zeroed in on George, piercing the air between them. Then just as quickly, he softened his gaze and let George see him shiver. What I'm going to tell you now is between just you and me. Confidentially, I'm horrified about My Lai. Those kids, those soldiers, how could they do something like that? Destroying that village, killing hundreds, young and old, men, women, and children. What's the truth behind it? I don't know, but you can be damn sure I'm going to find out. Dick downed what was left in his glass before changing the subject. Did you see the news last night? No, my flight arrived around midnight. Those damned college kids burned me in effigy. Do you know what it's like to watch a raging mob set fire to a scarecrow figure with your face? Even if it's some clown mask version of your face? Your mind knows it's not real, but Damn it, you can feel your flesh blistering, fire consuming your legs, arms, torso. It's just a mannequin, a Halloween mask, but shit. He picked up his glass, noticed it was empty, and waved the butler over. George frowned, surprised at his empathy and concern for a man for whom he thought he could never feel anything other than disdain or anger. A couple of years ago, some Bible Belt mobs built bonfires of anything related to the Beatles that they could find. Records, magazines, dolls. Watching the newsreels of them, the hate, the feral joy. I think of that sometimes when the crowds surround us. I mean, about the thin edge between passion and violence. Yes, exactly. Dick jabbed his index finger towards George. You know those kids? The ones marching and yelling about the war and stuff? What they don't understand is that I hate the war too. That hearing about My Lai turns my stomach. That every coffin that comes back to an American family is a punch in my gut. He hit the table, causing the tea in George's glass to jump the rim. Damn it, my goals in Vietnam are identical to theirs. To stop the killing, to end the war. But extricating ourselves out of Vietnam will take time. I'm working on it, and it will happen. Why can't those kids see that? George had never considered the idea that Nixon might not be the warmonger he'd been painted. Was it possible that the man was as much a victim of distortions and lies as the Beatles were? Dick, TM has taught me that you're more than the world's perceptions of you, more even than your own perceptions of yourself. When you find your core balance, your inner truth will shine for all to see. Dick's brow furrowed, but he seemed to think a moment before responding. So George pressed further. Would you like to try it? Sure, sometimes. Perhaps I will. Right now, I'm concerned about those kids on the college campuses. Not just the ones stirring up trouble, but those following them. The good kids who've been shaken to their core by the horrific pictures of the war that the TV brings into their living rooms every night. They're our children as much as the boys who are fighting in Vietnam, and we have to help them. Keep them from letting that bitterness and anger about the war turn them against our whole system, our country, and everything that America is. John's voice came unbidden in George's mind once again. Fucking idiot. He doesn't have a clue. But George heard the undertone of sincerity in Nixon's rant. And that's what he was depending on, that deep inside was a man who really cared. You know, my life's nothing like yours. All I have to contend with are crazy fans and the usual worries about business and creating the next song. But you've got the whole world on your shoulders. Still, what happened to me might be useful to you. You're right, George. We can be useful to each other. I'm glad you see it. Nixon sighed, a deep exhale that seemed to deflate the man. That damned effigy is a symptom of things heating up in this country. I'm afraid those kids could end up doing something violent that will rock America to its soul. I need your help, George. They need your help. The war will end. Heck, we're scheduled to bring 50,000 boys home from Nam over the next 6 months. And I guarantee they'll all be out of there as soon as possible. But the whole process will take time. Time to help the South Vietnamese stand on their own, to make sure the peace will hold, to be able to walk away with our heads held high as Americans. Your transcendentalism preaches patience, and that's all I'm asking, that those kids give peace a chance. Will you help me, help them, before something really bad happens? What exactly are you asking of me? I haven't figured out the details yet. I'm going with my gut here. The one thing I know is that those kids need to be talked down from the cliff's edge. I can't do that. They won't listen to me. Hell, all they want to do is burn me. But you have influence with them. You know, This is a perfect time to try TM to help you focus and figure out what your gut is telling you. Nixon took a sip of his drink while studying George over the rim. This TM stuff is important to you. The most important. Why? Because I believe it will be as powerful and useful for you as it has been for me. More so because your problems and concerns are far weightier than anything I've known. All it takes is closing your eyes for a few minutes and focusing on a mantra rather than on the stuff that's bombarding you. A mantra? It's a sound that helps you focus. George had worried about this part. A mantra is supposed to be given by a guru who crafts it to fit each individual. Who was he to give anyone, let alone the US president, a mantra? But he and Patty had once traded mantras just to see what would happen, and it had made no difference in their meditations. You can use Chiak. Chiak? What does it mean? The mantra has no meaning. That's its purpose. Caught up in his zeal, George leaned over the table, his arms stretched toward Dick. That's when he saw movement out of the corner of his eye. The two guards shifted their weight onto the balls of their feet. Nixon gave a small shake of his head, and the men stood down. George, you know, I've been very lucky in life, but it's luck born of hard work and good instinct about people. Not unlike you, I expect. He focused on the space between them. Then, with a decisive nod, he looked directly at George. Tell me more about this TM. It's really simple, but it's easier to show you than to explain. I'm not sure my men, Nixon pointed at the guards, would be comfortable with you trying to alter my consciousness or whatever it is you think you'd be doing. Oh, I won't be doing anything, sir. You're the only one who can free yourself from the distractions that keep you from realizing the truth that already exists within you. If I try this, will you consider helping me with the kids? Certain that once Dick experienced TM, the man to Genta would be drastically changed. George had no problem agreeing. Yes. Fine. Show me. Before you start, make sure you feel comfortable in your chair. George rearranged his body, lowering his shoulders and putting his feet flat on the deck so Dick could see what he meant. Then close your eyes and repeat Chiak silently. All kinds of thoughts will distract you at first. Don't fight them. Just focus on Chiak, and eventually those thoughts will be vanquished. Damn, this feels silly, but a deal's a deal. Dick squirmed a bit in his chair, then closed his eyes. After a minute or so, his face relaxed, his breathing slowed. Though his body twitched occasionally, he appeared to be giving TM a real try. George wasn't sure what he should do while he waited. Dick probably wouldn't be comfortable with the idea of George just watching him meditate. But George also knew he shouldn't disappear into a trance. He needed to be available to Dick when the man came out of it. So George watched the swelling sea, the waves gently rolling the boat, and the sun drifting down behind the Miami skyline. Dick remained silent for more than 15 minutes. Then he opened his eyes slowly. George recognized that gaze, that sensation of clouds clearing. He often wondered if that was what it was like to awaken from cataract surgery, to see without the gauzy yellow filter of time and experience, to have a child's vision once more. Dick focused on his hands, the table and glasses, the sky above, the sea beyond, and finally on George. His smile started as a crinkle around his eyes and spread over his entire face. His chest lifted, then compressed as he tasted the air around him. George waited, knowing that it can take several minutes to process thoughts as they come flooding back into your consciousness. Dick recovered much faster than George had expected. "That was very interesting," he said. "I see what you mean." "I'm glad it helped. I find that meditating at least once a day, I now know where I've gone wrong. I've been coddling all of them, the kids, the Viet Cong, everyone. I've been too soft, and they've taken advantage of me. All that's going to change." Nixon stood and put out his hand to shake George's. "Thank you. This has been a very informative meeting." Horrified at what Dick was implying, George protested, "No, that isn't." But he was interrupted by one of the Secret Service men who stepped forward to escort him away. When George didn't move immediately, the guard wrapped his large hand around George's upper arm and guided him toward the gangplank, where the launch was waiting to take him back to Coral Gables. "I'll be in touch, George," Dick called after him, "when I've figured out how we can best work together." Nixon never did contact George. But then George didn't really expect to hear from the man. Not when Nixon had sloughed off the needs and insecurities that had held him back from the truth within him. Peace was clearly the last thing Nixon now wanted. Nor did George ever again know peace. Each new headline ate away at his very foundation. "Nixon announces war escalation, 100,000 additional troops headed for Vietnam. U.S. withdraws from peace talks. Nixon to communists, America is as strong-willed and unbeatable as ever." Within 2 weeks of their meeting, U.S. troops invaded Cambodia to clear out Viet Cong border camps. Soon after, the bombing of North Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia was renewed with greater vigor and devastation than ever before. Nixon told Cronkite, "If we have to bomb them back to the Stone Age to get them to knock under, so be it." When Nixon's saber rattled at Moscow, threatening retaliation if they didn't stop supplying armaments to the Viet Cong, the headlines became even more terrifying. "Soviet troops arrive in Hanoi. Soviet jets bomb Saigon. Americans and Soviets battle on Laos border. Nuclear threat." Nixon also deployed troops on the home front to control the student demonstrations. The first stateside deaths were 15 students at Jackson University, then 22 at Kent State. It escalated with each demonstration until the Citizens' March on Washington ended with 275 dead and many hundreds wounded. Soon the heart was burned out of the peace movement, with the few remaining activists driven underground. George never saw or heard from John or Paul again. It was left to Ringo to tell him that he was being replaced on the new album by Eric Clapton. Not that it mattered anymore. Everything was dead within him. Whenever George tried to meditate, his mantra was drowned out by images of the dead and dying, and "What have I done?" repeated over and over again until it became an impenetrable barrier. And at the core of him, where his music had always lived, he was empty. When he picked up his guitar, his fingers spasmed. When he tried to sing, what came from his throat was strident, discordant. All George knew was that he had unleashed evil onto the world, and not even the memory of hope had survived within him. I hope you enjoyed this reading of The Truth Within, my story in the Across the Universe anthology. And we'll also listen to some of the other recordings of authors of stories from this anthology. And of course, please buy the book, Across the Universe, Tales of Alternative Beatles. And please let me know what you think. Check out my website, sallywienergrotta.com, and I hope to see you on social media. Thank you.